Leave the floor to Drew.
What? So first of all, I just want to thank the museum here, Laura and Joelle, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here to share some of our creation stories. Before I go any further, Audrey Chepot, Imot Punanape, Kes Paul Atnan, Tuwich, Tishosam, Tla'amin Creation Imot Punanape, Uktums Kaimu. So I just wanted to introduce myself in my language. My traditional name is Kes Paul, and I come from our village of Tishosam, which is the main village of our Tla'amin people. It's a pleasure for me to be here to share some stories. I'm going to be sharing our creation stories of our flood, and a couple of other stories if we have time. So I'm really honored to be here in the traditional village site of Ajumu. Ajumu is the name of Willington Beach, and in our language, Ajumu means a beautiful, flat, clear piece of land. So it was always a traditional village site of the Tla'amin people who lived here, and they smoked the chum salmon that would spawn up the little Willington Creek right next to it. The last person who lived there was my great uncle. His name is Muk Sama, and he had a small little house, little cedar shaped shack there right next to the creek, and he would have been there from about mid-October until the end of November, smoking the chum salmon that would be spawning up this little creek here. Another little interesting fact about where we sit on today is that these trails here, these Millennium Park trails, those trails have been there for thousands and thousands of years. So my Tla'amin ancestors used these trails to make their way up to Ha'aji, which is Cranberry Lake. So our people would harvest the wild cranberries in the cranberry bog there at Ha'aji. And my grandfather's mom was one of the people that walked this trail regularly with her sister, Annie Bob and Mary Bob, who would take their dugout from Tla'amin, and they'd land down here on the beach and walk up these trails to go and harvest the cranberries in their big cedar baskets, and of course bring these cranberries back home and dry them and preserve them for the winter months. So I just wanted to share that little bit of information about to where we're at today, in our beautiful sacred territory of our Tla'amin people. Our territory extends from around Stillwater in the south to Desolation Sound, further up through East and West Reganda, Cortez Island, together with our Quahus and Hamalco neighbors. We had no borders or separations until after colonialism, and they split us into 3 different Indian bands, but our territory would have extended far past Butte Inlet, up through Stewart Island, Sonora Island, all the way down here. So within that territory, we had many village sites. We had many natural occurrences happen over the tens of thousands of years that our people had occupied our lands here. And some of these stories are directly connected to our lands within our territory. So it's an honor for me to be able to share these stories, which have been passed down for generation to generation. And of course, we almost lost a lot of our stories. And of course, there are many stories that we did lose. It was forbidden for our people to pass down these stories, to share our language and our culture with our little ones for a long time there. So we're happily bringing this part of our culture back to our community, and leaving these stories for our little ones to grow up with, so that it's natural for them to grow up in a cultural way, hearing their language, hearing the stories, their culture, understanding our territory and the land, which has been passed down to us. So I'm going to open up with a song, and this is just an ancestral song that I learned from a tape which we found in a museum in Washington, D.C. So this song was recorded in 1926 Well, my great-great-grandfather was in the hops fields in Chilliwack, so that's how a lot of our people made money back then. They'd go away and they'd pick berries or pick hops, and that's how they made money. And I was told that they'd be lucky to make 10 cents a day picking hops in the field, so that's how they survived. So this song was left. It was recorded by Francis Densmore in 1926, and we were very happy to be able to get this tape back and learn from it, and now these are songs that we're able to pass down to the generations as well. So one of our ancestral songs. I'll have a seat now and start with a story. We're all here to hear some of our creation stories of our people. So tonight I'm going to start with, the creation story. So a long time ago, at the very beginning of time, this is a time where the animals were the rulers of our land. And yeah, feel free to sit on the floor here. That's and all the kids can come up front and sit on the floor too if they'd like. That's how our stories are passed down from generation on the floor of the big house during the winter months. So the creation of our people started a long, long time ago, when animals and humans alike were able to communicate with each other. And there was a village of people far up the coast. There was a young girl that lived with her grandmother. And Raven was the leader of this village at the time. You'll find this with a lot of our stories, that Raven was always, we always hear that Raven's a trickster, but to us, Raven was also a leader. So Raven was a leader in this village. The young girl, she lived with her grandmother in her big house there. And she was always told by her grandmother that you were never to eat the pitch off of a spruce tree. It was always forbidden for girls to eat the pitch off of the spruce tree, and the grandmother always told her granddaughter that. She said, when you go into the forest, you're picking berries, you're harvesting roots, you're never to eat the pitch from the spruce tree. And the granddaughter agreed. She said, yes, grandmother, I won't eat the spruce pitch. One day when the girl was up in the forest, she was harvesting berries, and she saw one of the young boys. He was there next to the tree, eating the spruce pitch off the tree. And to our people, they chewed it, and the boys, they chewed it like gum, but it was always forbidden for the girls to do so. And the young girl asked this boy. She said, "Hey, could I have some of that tree pitch?" And the boy said, "No, you know that you're forbidden. You're not allowed to eat this tree pitch." And the girl begged him. She said, "Please, could I have some of this tree pitch?" And the boy finally agreed. He said, "Yes, you could have some of this tree pitch. I'll give you some of this tree pitch, but you must swallow it. You can't spit it out." So she agreed. She said, "Yes, I'll take some of this tree pitch," and she swallowed that tree pitch. And she went home thinking nothing of it. She went back home to their big house, and days, weeks went by, and she started to feel this really weird movement in her tummy. And she looked down, and her tummy was moving, and she told her grandmother. She said, "Chicha," which is grandmother in our language, "my tummy's moving. My tummy hurts. It's making really weird movements." And right then and there, the grandmother knew what had happened. She knew that her granddaughter had eaten the tree pitch. And she said, "Granddaughter, you ate tree pitch, didn't you?" And which the granddaughter, she couldn't deny it. She said, "Yes, I did." But while this conversation was happening, there was somebody eavesdropping from the smoke hole in the roof of the big house. There's always an opening above the fire. And looking down through the smoke hole was Crow. And Crow was almost like, what do you call it? The Raven's assistant, I guess. So Crow, being the eavesdropper, brought this information back to Raven, the leader of the village, and said, the young girl had eaten the tree pitch. And of course this was forbidden for everybody to do. This was a bad omen for the people. So Raven decided that they were having to abandon the girl there. So that's what Raven instructed Crow to go around to all of the fires in the village and put out all of the fires. They sent the girl up into the forest to pick roots for baskets. And while she was up in the forest, the community, they packed up and they left her, they abandoned her there. So Raven sent Crow around. Crow was dumping water over all of the fires and making it hard for the young girl to survive after they had abandoned her. The grandmother felt pity on her granddaughter. She knew that her granddaughter would not be able to survive the winter, without having a fire. So she grabbed a really big horse clam shell, and she put a burning piece of amber into the shell. She closed it, and she dug a hole, and she put that shell into that hole, and she covered up the hole, and she told the young dog to tell the girl where this burning piece of coal was. So the girl went up into the forest. She was digging her roots, and she came back, and the whole village was gone. Not one person was left, and all the fires were put out, and the girl wondered why they had abandoned her. but she saw this dog and it was jumping up and down, as they do. It was swatting at the ground, jumping on one spot. And so the girl went up and she knew that there must be something there that the dog was trying to get at. So she uncovered it and found the shell with the burning piece of amber in it. She was able to start her fire again. So that's what she did. She started her fire. And, winter was coming, so, she went out and gathered food for herself and, for her, she knew she was pregnant, so she went out and gathered food for what she thought was going to be her tiny little baby. Time went on and, the girl went into labor. So she's there in her big house and she goes into labor and, to her surprise, out come 11 puppies. 11 puppies. So here she thought she was going to have one small little baby. That's what she collected, enough resources to last the winter. But out came 11 puppies. 10 of those were male and 1 was female. And she had wondered why she had given birth to 11 puppies. She was a human. She thought she would give birth to a human baby, but she had 11 puppies. But she loved these puppies, because they were her babies. She raised them. They were her own, right? So, as the winter months came on, the tide goes really low in the middle of the night, and she was out there clam digging because she needed enough food to feed her family of 11 puppies. So she went down to the beach at low tide in the middle of the night, and she's there digging away through the sand, getting her clams, and she stops because she could hear something up in the big house. And she thinks, where is this singing coming from? It sounded like there was a big gathering, a big potlatch taking place up in her big house. So she runs up and she bursts through the front door of her big house, and there's her 11 puppies are all cuddled up, sleeping next to the fire, nice and cute, all keeping warm, and they're not making any noise. And, she thinks this is really strange. The next night she goes down again to the beach and she's getting more clams. And she hears it again. She's there digging away and she goes up to the big house and same thing. All of her puppies are there laying in a big pile next to the fire, keeping warm. And so she decides on the third night she's going to trick them. Whatever is making this noise up in her big house, she's going to trick them. So she goes down to the beach and she gets her digging stick and she sticks it into the sand. She gets her hat. She puts the hat on top of her digging stick and she gets her wool cape that she has on and she wraps it around her digging stick. And she goes up around the back side of the house, and there's always an escape door through the back of the house during those days. So she goes up and she goes in through this escape door, and she walks in, and all of her 10 boys are dancing around the fire, and they're singing for each other. They're all dancing around the fire, and the one girl, she's standing at the door. She's peeking through the crack in the door, looking for their mom down the beach, and she tricked them. And so she, but the thing is that all of her children, they're dancing around the fire. They're in human form. They weren't puppies anymore, and all of their skins were in a big pile next to the fire. So she runs up and sneaks in. She runs up. She grabs this big pile of fur and she throws them into the fire, because she wanted her children to remain human, in human form. She asked them, and she asked them why. Why were you puppies? Why didn't you tell me? And the puppies said, well, we didn't know better. That's what we were born as, and that's all we knew, right? And so time went on, and you know, they started to grow really fast, these puppies, and you know, it was too much for the mother to, you know, take care of all 11 of her children. She needed to feed them all, and of course we know how it is with young ones. You know, they're expensive and they eat a lot. So they decided, and you know, the oldest boy, he stood up and he said, "Well, we gotta help our mama. We have to, you know, we each have to have a role, you know, in society." So the oldest boy, he stands up and he says, "Well, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna hunt seal." And then the other boy stands up and he says, "Well, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna hunt for mountain goat." And the other boy stands up and says, "Well, I'm gonna go out and hunt porpoise." And then one stands up, "I'm gonna go out and hunt deer. And I'm gonna go out and, you know, be a canoe carver." And all of them stood up and they all had roles and what they were gonna go do. "I'm gonna go catch salmon. I'm gonna build houses," you know. And finally, you know, at the very end, the girl was standing there and she says, "Well, you know, you build the houses, you build the canoes so that the other boys can go out and gather and bring it home to me and I'll cook it." And that's what the girl said. So that's what they did. All of the men went out and they each had their role in society, and all of them pitched in to, you know, to make sure that they survived, you know, as a family. You know, brought it back to the girl. We cooked it all, prepared it all, smoked all the fish, dried all the meat, and stored it all for winter. One day, the other villagers that left at the beginning of the story, once again, Crow was feeling really mischievous and wanted to go back and see if they had all died or if the young girl had died. So Crow flew back and landed there. And you know, to Crow's surprise, they had survived and they had a whole village full of young men and food prepared for them, and so they gifted Crow a little piece of porpoise meat, and you know, Crow took this porpoise meat and hid it in his cheeks and flew back to the other village site where the people were. "Watch your head," and you know, was eating this porpoise meat, and got caught. You know, the people caught and said, "Where did you get your food from?" And you know, Crow wouldn't tell them. He said, "No, I'm not going to tell you." So the people were, you know, they're wondering why Crow was getting this good food, because the village where they had gone, they were having a really hard time getting food. So Crow went back the next day, and you know, they gave him a dry piece of fish, and Crow flew back and was eating this fish, and the people said, "Well, we're gonna find out." So a raven sent the sand fleet to go and spy on Crow and find out where Crow was getting its food from. But Crow could hear sand fleet coming, jumping along. So Crow quickly hid the food and put it away. They went through all of the different bugs and the different animals, trying to find out where Crow was getting his food. And finally, the last one was the bed bug. The bed bug was so silent it was able to catch Crow eating the food that it collected from the young girl and all of her children. And finally, Crow was able to tell bed bug, "Oh, I got the food from the young girl and her family. They survived, and there's this big village now, and they have tons and tons of food." So the village, they packed up and they went back to see for themselves, to see the young girl and her family. And to their surprise, they paddled their canoes to the beach and they came ashore, and the young girl and all of her children, her 10 sons and 1 daughter, welcomed the community that had abandoned them before, and welcomed them ashore. And you know, in our culture, when people come to visit you, just like back there's food. Our people put out food, and you know, if you come to visit, you're never going to leave hungry because we're always going to feed you. So that's what they did. They welcomed them ashore, and they had a big feast full of all of that food there. So, you know, there was all of these dishes laid out on the table there. You know, there was mountain goat meat, there was porpoise meat, there was seal meat, there was deer meat, and there was all of the different types of salmon. It was all laid out there on the table. And of course, here comes Raven first, being the leader. And Raven kept going to all of the different dishes saying, "Oh, is this for me? Is this for me?" And the young girl and her family said, "No, Raven, you were the one that put out all of the fires and abandoned us, sent Crow around to, you know, to kill us off. None of these are for you." And at the very end, there's a platter of dogfish, and they said, "This one's for you. It's all the dogfish fins and the food that they didn't eat. Since you were so mean to us, you have the dogfish fins." And you know, the rest of the people were fed all of this good food. So these people ended up being the first ancestors of our Tla'amin people, and to this day, our people, you know, still eat all of the same foods. You know, not as much the mountain goat, the seal, porpoise anymore, but you know, that was a traditional staple of our food for thousands and thousands of years. So those were the first ancestors of our Tla'amin people, and that's where the Tla'amin people came from. So that is our creation story for the Tla'amin people. And you know, a couple of different nations have very similar stories. Like the people up in Bella Bella have a really similar story, and the people on the west coast, there's slight differences. Like some of them had 7 puppies, some of them had 13, but for us we had 11. So this is the creation story of the Tla'amin, Kahus, and Hamalko people. Yeah, so happy to share that one with you all.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's a story that I've grown up listening to my whole life. Of course, every family is going to have a little different version of the story. You know, every elder is different. Every person you talk to is going to have a little variance to it, right? But you know, this is a story that I grew up hearing from my elders. Time's going really fast, isn't it? Already 10 after 7. So I think we have about, what, 20 more minutes? Yeah. So I think I'll share 1 or 2 more short stories. And one that people were really interested in hearing right now is the story of the flood. And you know, with everything going on right now, you know, a long time ago, our people had visions that, you know, a big flood was going to come and was going to swamp our land here. And you know, we have these oral stories that, you know, tell us that these big floods flooded our land, but we also have scientific evidence that salt water did cover our land at one point, you know, during either an ice age or a big tsunami that happened. And of course, we know that there's salt water at the bottom of Powell Lake, so that just confirms some of our stories that, you know, at one point salt water did come up over our land. It did, you know, cover the lake at one point. For us, there was a really gifted man. He could see the future, and he could see things. And he dreamt that there was going to be a big flood. You know, water was going to cover our lands. So he prepared for this. He had his wife and children weave this really long, like I'm talking really long, cedar rope. And him and the son, they traveled up by canoe up towards Goat Lake, and they were going to go find the highest mountain that they could find, and they were going to tie their canoes to this tall mountain. So that's what they did. The father and the son, they went up and they decided that they were going to tie their canoes to Beartooth Mountain. And you know, the name for Beartooth, we almost lost it too, but you know, my grandfather told me this story, who learned the story from his father-in-law, Johnny Bob. And he was thinking really hard. He had his eyes closed, and he said, Tla'amin. That was the name of Beartooth Mountain, Tla'amin. And Tla'amin in our language means a place to steer your canoe towards. So when the man and his son were going up, they almost saw it. It was a landmark right in front of them, a really high mountain tall tip. And they said, we're going to go tie our canoes to Tla'amin. So that's what they did. They went up and they took the really long cedar rope that the wife and daughter had woven, and they tied it to the very top of Tla'amin, and they went and they anchored their canoes to the mountain. The other people laughed at this man. They said, "You're crazy. You know, the water isn't going to magically appear and cover our land." And so the other people, you know, they didn't believe him. Sure enough, you know, the waters started to rise, and you know the water started to cover our land. And the man went up with his family, and they went into their canoes up at Beartooth Mountain. And the people were begging him, and they said, you know, please let us tie our canoes to your canoe so that, you know, we don't float away. And you know, the man said, well, I told you that this was going to happen. And you know, so he started to make trades. You know, I'll trade you this. You could tie your canoe to my anchor. You know, if you give me 100 blankets or, you know, deer or things like that. So, you know, he's making trades. And, you know, the people that weren't so lucky, their canoes started to float away, and they ended up down by Seattle. And to this day, the people down there near Seattle still speak a dialect of our language here. So there's words that we can understand from them. And, a long time ago, our people were down there. They're berry picking, like I shared earlier, back in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. Our people were berry picking down there, and our people were known for speaking our language. They, you know, different tribes. You know, by that point they were losing their language, but the Tla'amin people were still very strong with our language, and they were speaking their language down there in the berry fields on Bainbridge Island. And the people down there recognized the language, and they started speaking back to them. And you know, our people were surprised at the fact that, you know, the people down there could understand them. But that's because of that flood. And every single coastal nation will have a flood story. One that's really close to us is up in the Fraser Valley, where you know, I have family up there, and my partner has family up there as well. Up in Chehalis, right next to Chehalis is the Scowlitz Reserve. And they have the same story, and their people floated down just past Olympia, Washington. And to this day, the people down there, down on the state side, are called Cowlitz and Chehalis. And on the Canadian side, up in the Fraser Valley, they're called Scowlitz and Chehalis. So, you know, these are true stories of this event happening. And every single nation will have, you know, variants of this story as well. Like up in Toba Inlet, right at the head of Toba Inlet, there's these 6 pools at the base of the tall mountains, and that's where the anchors dropped. You know, from those canoes. Up in Butte Inlet, there's a mountain called Tla'amin, and it's called Estero in English, and that's where the Homolko people tied their canoes. And for neighbors over in Campbell River and Cape Hutch, they have a mountain up in Topaz Harbor called Tika, where they tied their canoes. And our Comox relatives had Quinish, which is now known as Forbidden Plateau. Quinish, they call it as well. So, you know, every single indigenous nation will have the story, which means that our people have lived through these life events. And you know, when I'm sharing these stories and I'm thinking about these natural occurrences that happen to our people, I often wonder if some of these events that they're experiencing could be ice ages. You know, when they talk about the transformer came and transformed our land right in front of their eyes, could have been an ice age, right? You know, came in and created some of these islands. So that's the story of the flood that happened here, and it's happened on more than one occasion here. We have multiple flood stories that happened here, so could probably happen again. Maybe not in our lifetime, but maybe down in the future. One day that our lands will be covered in water again. So, not to scare anybody, of course, but be prepared. Always have your emergency kit by the door. So yeah, those are two of our creation stories. I know we have a few minutes left. I want to open it up to see if there's something that people want to know. There's something that a story that you really, really want to hear.
Eager audience.
Yeah.
The question is whether there's any story regarding people coming from faraway lands or people coming from the sky.
Yeah, so we have those, we've heard of those stories too. We've heard of, as well, I'll tell you the one, our people made trade with the people from Asia far before we first had contact with Europeans. So, back in the 1400s when Spanish and people were first in contact through Mexico and other places. Our people were advanced. We had advanced tools. We had metal, and people always wondered how we got our tools. And our people didn't have a word in English for it, but the closest translation that they come up with was the people with slanted eyes. So to us, that was the Asian people. So our people have stories of traveling to northern Japan by canoe, and the people from northern Japan traveling this way by canoe. We also have stories of traveling by canoe to places like Hawaii using the star system, following the constellations. So, and we also know that people did migrate through our territories. We have stories of people passing through our territories from the north and making their way south to places like Mexico and other places. But those stories to us, they were visitors coming through our land. We don't believe that our people ever crossed any land bridge. We have, we're finding more and more archaeological evidence that proves that our people were here before they say we walked over a land bridge. So we do have stories of people passing through our territories, but to us, since the beginning, we've always been here. So. And I have heard, like the Cowichan people, for example, they have their first ancestor fell from the sky. So I have heard of those stories, but to us, we have our first ancestors came from puppies. They didn't fall from the sky. So, yeah, I hope that answered your question. Yeah. Back here.
What about Texada?
Yeah, so Texada, we've always heard a story from islanders that Native people never went to Texada Island, which is just totally untrue. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of years of archaeological sites on Texada Island. Sayayin is our name for it. We do have a story of how the island was created, however, and our people watched it bubble up from the ground at a place called Maloho. Maloho means to bubble up from the ground, and on the would it be the southeastern side of Agates and Harwood Island. It's called Maloho because that's where our people watched Texada bubble up. We think it was probably during a big earthquake because as you look at Texada Island, it's one of the only Gulf islands that runs fully like north to south, whereas the other islands are east-west. So Texada Island, we think, bubbled up from a big fault line during a big earthquake. Our people did go to Tla'amin. We have large village sites at Shelter Point, at Tla'amin, which is the name of Blubber Bay. Our people lived there up until even about the 1950s. Our people were living there, and one of my greatest teachers, the late Maggie Wilson, she lived there with her grandparents. She was one of the last ones to live there, and they had a cabin right where the power lines went in towards Blubber Bay, and they would go there every year. They would can their fish there, and they'd sell their fish there in cannery. And they showed up one day, their house was bulldozed, and they were putting in the power lines over their house. And you know, she was a tiny woman, you know, she laughed about it. She was cracking up laughing, actually telling me the story. We showed up one day and our house was bulldozed and our house was just gone. Right? So our people did live there, and they spent a lot of time over at Tla'amin. I saw a hand over here somewhere, yeah?
Yeah, I just want to support the fact that there are flood stories, and because I heard one from the Saanich Peninsula as well.
Yeah, the Saanich, and I think they used Alwanu, the mountain there behind, what's it called? Is it Mount Newton? I think it's Mount Newton. Alwanu. I just know their language. I did college there and heard all of their stories as well. So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Can you share the story of the ship?
Which one?
The one that was sank?
The one that sank in front of our village?
Yeah.
So there's a story of one of the early trading ships. I believe it was a Spanish trading ship. When they first came up into our territory, they were here. The Spanish were here before the British were here, and the Spanish actually brought us more sickness than the British did, because our people were immune to that. So there was a Spanish ship that came in and anchored off of our village site, and a bunch of Tla'amin men went out with knives in their mouth, and they swam out to that ship, and they ended up killing everybody on that ship and sinking that ship. So not much of a story to go there, but that's one of the stories that our people share. And they only did that because they knew what those ships were bringing, right? We had 20 to 40,000 people within the area, and that number dwindled down to about 100 people, right, because of these illnesses. So, our population back then, quadrupled with the population of the areas now, right? So we knew what these ships were bringing. When Captain Vancouver showed up in June of, is it June of 1792? July 1792. He sailed into our territory, and he didn't bump into any people, but that's because our people already knew what these ships were bringing. They were bringing diseases. So when Captain Vancouver sailed around Sarah Point, of course we know a couple of things. Captain Vancouver was really depressed. He had not found what he was coming to look for. He thought he was going to have a big payday and find this big passageway to Asia, which he didn't find. He kind of realized here in our Tla'amin territory that he was circumnavigating a big island, which would go on to be named after him, Vancouver Island. He became really depressed. He named those areas after his family, his two sisters back in England, which were Sarah and Mary. Mary Point is on the Cortez Island side, Sarah Point is on the mainland side. And he named that after his family back home. Came around the corner, and he was just angry. He was depressed, and it was gloomy. And he said, "It's so desolate here," So he named it Desolation Sound. And came across the village of our people, which was Machenay. Machenay is Machen is known as Flea. And it was Flea Village, and so it was a big village built on a big high bluff up in Desolation Sound, now known as Prito Haven. And it was built on this big high rock because they were keeping an eye out for ships coming, raiders. And but there were people living there at that time, and when Captain Vancouver came, the fires were smoldering, but the people had put out all of their fires, and they were running up into the mountains because they knew, they didn't want to get the illnesses brought by these ships. So, Captain Vancouver, before leaving, it's called Machinai, Flea Village. All of his crew were covered in fleas. So when they sailed out of Machinai, out of Flea Village, there was a bunch of naked British guys on their ship because they'd taken off all of their clothes and they were towing their clothes behind their boats as they sailed out. So that's a little bit of the story of first contact with our people. Another funny fact is when they were first trading with our people were giving them dried herring, dried fish, and in return they were getting gold coins. But our people did not know what a gold coin was. They didn't have any use for a gold coin. So over at Blubber Bay, where they were making contact and trading with our people were skipping these gold coins across the water, seeing how far they could throw them into the water.
You're just wasting.
We had no idea what it was, right? And of course, people have tried to look for these gold coins in Blubber Bay. Divers have gone down, but of course, due to mining, you can't find nothing over there. So, I'm sure, 10, 20, 30, 100 feet down below the murky waters of Blubber Bay, you'll find these really old gold coins that appeared from those early trading ships. So, a couple of funny stories from our territory. Did you have a question over here? I don't bite. Oh yeah, so there is the mouse and the wildfire. Yeah, so it's been a long time since I've actually heard this story, but I'll share a little bit about what I remember.
I know the whole story.
You probably would. I learned this when I was your age or younger, but excuse me. How does this go again? When the mouse was hiding from the wildfire, and the mouse went and dug itself into the pine tree, and the Douglas fir, yeah, and the mouse got stuck. And if you look at pine cones now, the way pine cones are shaped, you'll see the tail of the mouse still sticking on the pine cone. So, I haven't heard this story since I was a kid, so I'm gonna have to touch up on this story. Thank you for reminding me. See, that's the thing, right? We need to keep sharing these stories. We need to keep, telling our kids these stories and passing it on, just like our language. If we don't use it, we're gonna lose it. So that's why, I'm very grateful to be able to share this with you all. Yeah.
Any ideas to why 11 puppies are not 7 or 9 or?
I have no idea. Probably, they each had a role, right? So I think that must have been just meant to be, what their roles were in society. So yeah, I don't have a good answer for that question, but I just matched what needed to be done, I guess. Any more questions? Yes.
Is there a reason why, for the dogs, were they 11 when they came out?
No, they were babies.
If there was a story, another story of that dog, the dog story, what was the most puppies in the story?
I think 13. I'm not too sure which nation has a story with 13, but I've heard there are nations with 13 puppies in their stories.
Fish makes way more than that.
So those were just a couple of our stories. We have a lot more stories to share, and hopefully one day we could have them all in children's books and things like that we could have published, right? So, it's been an honor for me to share with you all tonight. I just want to thank you all once again for coming out and listening to me. It's a pleasure. So, raise my hands to you all. Thank you.